Hi, everyone. Welcome to Crimes and Cocktails. We're having people filter in, so we'll start with a poll, a fun poll, hopefully, and then get kind of wrapping. But let's let people filter in for a little bit. As you're joining, have a temperature check. It's chilly here in California, but want to hear about your holidays. Did it go better, what you expected, or worse than expected? Want to start off with that poll. All right. Welcome, everybody. As you're joining in, there should be a poll up, taking a temperature on how your holiday season went from a business perspective, at least. Hope we already had a wonderful holiday season. Right. Have some really exciting content today, looking back over the last maybe 45 days and then what we expect for the next rest of the year, some fun stories about some professional fraud rings that conduct human trafficking and the worst of the worst and how we help stop them. And hopefully that'll be really entertaining and interesting for you all. All right. I think we are maybe ready for kicking off the poll results. Let's go ahead and get that. All right. And in general, looks like folks, almost 2/3 of folks have, were right where they expected to be for the holidays. And then about a quarter of folks had better than expected holidays. And so that's pretty similar to what we saw in our network and in the Adobe data and the MasterCard data. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go on, but congrats on everybody hitting their targets. And then also for those of you who surpassed them, that's awesome. So today we have, I'm Bennett. Those of you who haven't met me ever, I go by my surname. I'm the Chief Customer Officer here at Signifyd. So I head up, of course, our customer success teams, but most relevantly for today, I also head up our risk intelligence and our chargebacks investigations teams. So the folks that kind of are on the front lines of understanding the fraud stories that are prevalent in the retail industry. I also have our business intelligence and strategy teams. So some of the stuff that I'll be talking about from a macroeconomic perspective will fully be trying to blend all of that together. And with me, I have Phelim, who is joining us from 7 p.m. across the Atlantic. Hey, Phelim.
Hey, how's it going?
And yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, I'm Phelim Killick, a data analyst at Signifyd. So I'm on the marketing team, and it's my job to pull out insights from our commerce network to show what's happening out there in the world of e-commerce and how it's performing.
Excellent. Thanks, Phelim. All right. And so we have met us, hopefully. If there is a Q&A, if you want to ask any questions, have a team behind the scenes that is going to be here. There's about 100 people already. We're expecting, that's pretty close to what we're expecting based on the invite. So lots of really smart people who have a myriad of experiences here. Please ask questions. We welcome that. Will keep us more interesting than the content, always. So please do ask questions. We will talk about the holidays. Phelim has some really good data from that. I'll tell you about one of the most sophisticated fraud rings I've experienced in my career and that Signifyd has seen. It's a really fascinating story, hopefully. We'll talk a little bit about what we see in the broader state of fraud and what you can be doing in 23. And then we have a Q&A and wrap up. Of course, we'll do questions if they're relevant before then. So don't be shy, write your questions in the chat. Zoom function, and at the end we have some fun gifts. So we'll talk about that once we get there. But thanks everybody for attending and hopefully spending a fun and insightful 45 more minutes with us. There will also be polls, so I'll pause for maybe like 30 seconds of polls. Of course, it's more fun when everybody participates and we can maybe get some sharing going on. Okay, Philo.
Yeah, so just starting off, what we've seen this holiday season was that it exceeded our expectations. So before the holiday season started, we had an exercise where we predicted what was going to happen. And what we thought would happen was that overall November, December spend would outpace Cyber Week spend. So Cyber Week spend will be slightly diluted by sort of early shopping and that growing trend. But what actually happened is that holiday spending was like quite robust throughout November, December. So it grew 10% overall in November, December, and 11% in that all-important Cyber 5 Cyber Week. And that's what we were seeing in our commerce network this year. I think drilling then into our next slide, we can see, just looking at Cyber 5, we can see that actually Saturday and Sunday grew the most over last year's levels. And what we, so maybe that's an emerging trend where these days are becoming more important, and still got a way to go in terms of volume to meet Black Friday and Cyber Monday. But just an interesting thing there. But overall, as I said, 11% growth. And really the driver for that wasn't like increase in cost or increase in prices, because average order value stayed relatively flat, only grew 1.5%. But what we've seen was transaction count grew 9% over Cyber 5. And that just means that more people were shopping, and more people were shopping more often. And then the overall reason as to why we thought that happened is an increase in promotional activity. So there was there's 23% increase in spend with a discount code applied. So that's just one aspect of promotional activity that someone can do. But it's still a stark increase from discount codes being used over last year.
Yeah, and there's a question if we'll share kind of slides here, and yes, they are available, and we have live pulse data that we'll make sure available, and towards the end we'll have a series of ways to maybe get some more intel as well. But yes, no need to, I mean, feel free to screenshot if you'd like and kind of share. That's the whole purpose of this. So yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. And then just taking a look back at over the November, December holiday season. So we're looking at constants and drivers here. So the cart characteristics remain constant. So there wasn't too much change in each transaction. So average selling price was flat at 0.3%. Cart size, or number of products in a cart, was almost exactly flat. And our average order value over the 2 months of the holiday season was down slightly at 0.36%. So again, what those drivers were was that order count and the spend with a discount code applied, and that resulted in a 10% change overall for November, December in terms of GMV.
Yeah, and I just want to talk a little bit about where this data is coming from, so that maybe you all can have a little bit of a sense. Signifyd processes hundreds of billions in GMV and across the world, but in general, we have the largest of retailers, and then also mom and pops on Shopify and BigCommerce and Magento, for example. So we have a pretty representative set of data in terms of the types of retail that would be conducted over a holiday period. And if you compare our data with, say, like Adobe, which also puts out a report, or MasterCard, which also publishes a report, we're now like simpatico with kind of their results. One thing that I will note is you need to be careful about looking at volume and pricing from someone that doesn't actually see the result of the final transaction. And so that is one thing that you might get from a MasterCard or from us that you might not get from some other source. Is it's fairly easy to see what was something offered at, what was something bought at, but did it actually settle? Was it not returned, and all that kind of piece. And so I think that's something that could be very interesting in terms of our data of like, how are retailers actually making money, right? And what was the final selling price from that perspective? So some really cool insights here, and frankly, pretty in line with the poll that we started with of, hey, about 25% better than we expected, which is literally the 8 to 10%, right? So we're right all here together, kind of moderately pleasantly surprised, right? So thanks, Phil.
No worries. And yeah, this next slide just highlights the differing amounts of performance in those in our key verticals. So the big winners that has been much touted were luxury goods and grocery this year, and that's mainly due because they're kind of resistant to economic headwinds like inflation. So luxury consumers are going to spend on luxury goods, and people got to eat. So grocery and household goods are going to benefit from the increase in prices in terms of year over year GMV. And then highlighting some of the lesser verticals that performed less well was business supplies and alcohol. So this could sort of be expected given that the world's kind of opened up now. There's no word of Omicron or COVID anymore or as much. So people are going back into the office and going back into hospitality venues to enjoy themselves and work.
Yeah, I think that this is the start to what I call a barbell curve that I'll mention a couple other times as well. Is for me, when I look at our clients that are doing well compared to the rest of the economy, or other folks that are doing well in the in retail, what I see are really high quality, high end kind of like statement pieces, right? So like a statement outfit, right? Like I'm gonna, Phelan just mentioned, I'm gonna go out to the bar again. Okay, well, my gosh, I haven't been out to a bar in 18 months or whatever. All right, so you're gonna have like a really nice outfit, and you're gonna match a watch with it, or you're gonna accessorize. That's what people seem to want to be doing, is like they put together a really high-end statement outfit. So if you have a luxury good, or you have something that's perceived as very high quality, maybe people will be willing to shell out for that. Then, of course, you also then have like, okay, well, maybe I'm not going to buy the latest version of the AirPods, but if I can get the most, the penultimate version of the AirPods at a deep discount, that value is insane, right? And so those are kind of the two trends that I see consumers kind of doing in terms of where they're willing to put their money. And in general, I think most consumers are desperate to kind of get out of their houses, right, and to kind of get back out in the world. And with the fuel prices and kind of the uncertainty around kind of travel and across the world and those types of things, it seems like people are like, okay, all right, fine. I'm gonna go out. I'm gonna either have a staycation or I'm gonna go to a Disney resort, and kind of nothing in between seems to be like what we're kind of seeing. And that applies to retail as well. And sorry, there was a question about purchase method, and absolutely yes. And if you are interested in understanding where did the stimulus checks go, right? We actually have data on that, of when that flowed into retail, and the specific question was about credit, debit, buy now, pay later, and the answer is absolutely yes, which is super fascinating. We could probably do a whole crimes and cocktails session on just what's happening in buy now, pay later. In fact, maybe we will if there's interest, but super fascinating right now. Given kind of the interest rates and, kind of where that sector is headed. But yes, we do. Okay. All right.
Yeah. And then just to highlight the price sensitivity of consumers today, again, a broken record, discount code applied data, but what we're seeing is where we saw the highest amount of sales growth is where we saw the highest amount of discount codes applied in that Saturday and Sunday for Black Friday, and that concludes my section, but I think the next slide is over to you, Bennett. Over price sensitivity. And
yeah, definitely.
Yep.
So the slide on the left is one of my favorite in terms of explaining the last couple years in terms of retail spend, and then also prices and price sensitivity, and and where folks can find that discount. So the red line on the left-hand graph is the overall US e-commerce consumer price index. So basically, what's the change in price kind of comparison from that perspective? Is it more or less expensive to buy something, right? Think of this as kind of like an inflation rate, The blue line is the overall US consumer price index. So what you see was a frankly monumental shift in March of 2020. Remember what was happening in March of 2020. Hopefully that's hopefully, we could kind of, okay, oh, right, that was almost 3 years ago. Wow, that just boggles my mind. Okay, so almost 3 years ago, that curve flipped to where things were more expensive online than in person. Makes sense, right? People weren't able to get out to the stores. People were like seeing huge amounts of demand online. Demand creates pricing, power. And so the prices really increased. You see kind of a peak there in kind of 2021, held kind of constant. We had all the fulfillment issues, people passing on the shipping costs to folks. Then we had inventory issues, just massive pricing power, right? If you had the inventory. And then we see a dramatic shift as the world opens up, from COVID, as we see the logistics, snarls kind of smooth themselves out. And we see a return to arguably a more normal curve where e-commerce has a lower CPI than overall US CPI. I think this is super interesting. And what this means is that us and Statista and McKinsey and everyone who's kind of looking at this is saying, hey, this curve on the left, if consumers really want a deal, and now prices in general are lower online again than they would be in the store, or it's perceived to be that way, then we're going to see massive growth in e-commerce. 20% growth year over year from 22 to 23 is two factors. First off, 22 had a pretty disappointing annual growth rate. If you think about all of the logistics problems and all of this, right? The graph on the left is only price, it's not volume, right? So 22 was a relatively disappointing year in terms of sales for folks, relatively speaking. So now you have an easy comp from 22, where we had all these logistics problems, you had all these inventory management problems, right? You had, I can't get new customers because of, Apple rolling out its new privacy concerns. All of these, headwinds. Now we see fewer headwinds and we see lower prices online. So everyone is projecting a really robust 23. I frankly was really floored when I saw this 20% number, maybe November of last year. And as I've seen the data and thought about it a little bit more, I'm like, gosh, okay, all right, makes a little bit of sense. One other piece that I'll note is I mentioned the Apple and the privacy. I saw a fascinating report today where people are pulling back from Meta spend, Meta, Facebook, Instagram, et cetera, in terms of their retail ad spend and focusing in on other areas. I think that whoever can crack their top of funnel, and if that top of funnel is your own application, think Walmart and Amazon, right? Like that, there's just so much potential there for customer lifetime value. If you can have that direct relationship with how they shop with you and you don't have to acquire them again. 8% of all retail is projected to be done via mobile in the US in 23, which is double what it was pre-COVID. I think that's really fascinating as a CAGR, and 8% is small, but still like double in only 3 years is kind of crazy. So I think that these are two really interesting themes, right? One is take advantage of consumers perceiving online channel as having value, as having deals. We can talk about what it means, if you have discounts or not. In fact, we're going to ask a little bit about that in the next poll. But overall, we think that there's going to be a lot of growth potential in 23, mainly because 22 was kind of sucky, not to put too fine a point on it. All right, so if we jump forward into the next poll, I think that will hopefully lead us out of this section on kind of how the economy is doing. So question was, hey, did you offer larger discounts to your customers in 22? And very curious on terms of yes, no, or not sure. And there's a question, do loyalty points roll up into discount code applied? Absolutely, yes. If there's any kind of price and then plus a discount, right, code or kind of a loyalty program that would have that we capture that as part of our pricing concept. Yes. All right. Excellent. I know that lots of people did this. I'm curious how many of us aren't sure. And also curious how many of us were hard no. Because our data, at least for me, when I look at it, I'm like, gosh, where does this end? Right. In terms of applying discounts. All right. All right, I think maybe that'll be enough time. And actually, this is super fascinating. So this is so interesting to me. Half of the group here said no, we didn't increase our discounts, which is fascinating. And then about a third said yes, and about 20% said not sure. So I'd be very curious, kind of the overlap of the yes, and then we also had a better holiday than expected. It's actually pretty close. I wonder what the Venn diagram is of that. We'll analyze that later and kind of show. I personally am most interested in who had a successful holiday and who didn't have to do discounts. That's who I want to talk to. I think that's going to be a fascinating conversation. What are you doing to make that work in this place? Hopefully I'll get some learnings and be able to share. All right, turning to a little bit more of the crimes side of this. So this fraud ring that we encountered in call it late Q3, early Q4 was one of the most sophisticated and interesting in fraud rings that I've ever encountered. And so first off, what do we know about them and what don't we know about them? Okay, first off, this is definitely Southeast Asian-based fraud ring. They successfully got away with nearly 700 million, we estimate, across all of e-commerce worldwide, most of that within the US. And the attempts were nearly triple that, right, from that perspective. So we're talking huge scale of attack. And it is a level of complexity that is really quite fascinating, to kind of take a look at. So I always envision, if you've seen kind of those YouTube videos of like scamming a scammer or like finding the headquarters of like a call center, right? And you see kind of like phone banks of people like calling and like trying to get, gift cards from your grandmother or whatever. Okay. Picture that, except instead of calling, what these folks are doing is they're going through and they're taking stolen financials, or they're creating synthetic identities, and opening up, credit facilities or buy now pay later facilities. And then they're going through and they're finding, hey, can I buy this particular item that I know is going to be available for sale on another marketplace? And so oftentimes what they do is they'd have storefronts that are linked up to the marketplaces. They buy the good from a direct consumer provider, and then they have the good shipped to the actual consumer. So the actual consumer thinks that they are getting a great deal. They're maybe getting half off AirPods, per this example. But the fraudsters are not paying with any real money. They're using a stolen financial. So someone is actually getting this. They're an actual consumer. And then they're actually monetizing these stolen financials in kind of a triangulation way to be able to avoid detection for the final result. So the level of complexity in terms of, just think about how complex your own logistics chains are, right? And it's totally legitimate and above board. Now think if you have to have a middle person who's going to be able to get the good from the original buyer to the consumer who's trying to buy the good. It's a fascinating logistics problem on its own, supply chain problem on its own to try to think about. But really, I think what it tells me is the level of complexity that you can support with this type of activity is what is so astounding to me. Like, this is a legitimate business, right? They're not making 660 million in profit, of course, right? Because they actually do have to like pay for the, they have to actually like get the goods to somewhere, right? From that perspective and all of that, they're not getting the money from the original sale. So they're not making 100% profit on this, but the fact that they have costs of goods sold, the fact that they have a supply chain, the fact that they have a talented team of people who are going through a flow chart of, okay, well, this particular site sells this thing that I know, this item that I know is going to, be hot on the aftermarket. I'm going to go and place an order, and then I'm going to try again 5 minutes later, and then I'm going to try again 5 minutes later, and then I'm going to try again 5 minutes later. You do that times 100 people. And what you get is once per minute, kind of a drip, but a constant drip, kind of a water torture of fraud attacks. And it became very difficult for the traditional systems of fraud and abuse to be able to detect these, because this wasn't an unsophisticated, I'm going to do a bot attack, I'm going to try 100 attempts in a minute. That's super easy to detect, right? Alarm bells go off, all kinds of systems will try to detect that. But what they do is they would say, all right, I'm going to test the fences. Do I have to have an account in order to be able to buy 5 of these type of items? I don't? Great. All right, I'm going to hold on, make note of that. Once the holiday period comes around, make 5 AirPod purchases, wait 5 minutes, make 5 more AirPod purchases, somebody else from the same call center with the same IP address, but going somewhere else. And it's very, very difficult for these human being experts who are looking kind of in transaction stream. And it's in the middle of a better than expected holiday period for many of us. So volume is up, and we just see incredible amounts of scale at this. I think it's really interesting because this particular fraud attack affected many different sectors at once. Infected basically anybody who sold kind of general merchandise, as well as consumer electronics, as well as apparel. Like, it hit a lot of different types of folks, which is unusual. And it's the type of attack that we being Signifyd, are very used to seeing in Latin America, where it's not going to be only bots. It's not going to be only kind of like one bad actor, but it's a coordinated set of actors that kind of have a very steady drip of attack. What I think is super fascinating about this one as well is they were very successful. So they had trained these human beings incredibly well. I'm sure they had flowcharts, just as you, for your support people, might have, okay, well, here's your conversation tree, right? They had those. They had agent escalations. Okay, all right. Well, this tactic that we were using to get our orders, confirmed and shipped out is no longer working. Okay, an agent gets escalated to who will try a new thing. If that new thing works, okay, all right. Now here's the new flow chart. Go through that. And so you saw a kind of iterative process until the retailers were able to successfully put up defenses that completely deterred. But there are thousands of retailers. Right. And so then they would, move on to the next playbook. Okay, here's this site. This site has their defenses up. Let's move on to the next one. Just very methodical. And I think one of the things that we aren't sure on is how long it took them to set up this attack and how long it might take them to set up a next. Right. But I can tell you that they certainly are very well funded now from that perspective. All right. There's later on, I have a podcast coming out in a couple days, and we have the state of fraud report, and there's a bunch of other stuff that we can have. As a poll, kind of this group obviously skews mainly towards payments or product or fraud and risk professionals. So very curious, what abuse or loss vectors are you all most focused on for 2023? And while we're talking about this, there's a question from about how does this level of fraud compare to last year? The attempts, we talk about like, hey, in the span of about 45 days, the attempts were about an entire year's worth pre-COVID. So just an incredible concentrated attack from that perspective. But then we also have some numbers in terms of different types of fraud pressure changing, as they have changed over time. So I think we'll have hopefully a more in-depth. But in terms of the scale of the attempts, it's frankly one of the largest, if not the largest, e-commerce attacks that we've ever seen or reported on in the US. All right. So results. Okay. So we have here, looks like fraud leads the way in terms of on top of people's minds, followed by returns, followed by disputes, and then fulfillment. People are not worried about promo abuse as much in this group anyway. So fraud and returns definitely top of mind for us. I think returns is creeping up in that, and in fact, that's kind of where our product roadmap is headed, frankly, because we're seeing it too in our data. All right. So if we maybe bump forward one more, and let's start talking a little bit more about what are we seeing in terms of trends, and kind of the key that I'd say is, Phelim, yeah, go ahead.
Yep. So what we're expecting to see in 2023 is sort of fraud innovation. So Bennett's talked about that, the fraud ring that we've seen last year. Aspects of that you'll see continuing. So overall, fraud pressure in 2022 was 34% higher than 2021. So over a third increase there. But what we're also seeing is that professional fraud rings are up in their game. They're changing tactics. They're using bot attacks. So automated attacks is up 71% in 2022. And then they're also using mature accounts, either doing a brute force account takeover, or they're feigning credibility by building synthetic identities or accounts, so that those small attacks that Bennett talked about, building up that credibility and then going all out for the big win. So what we're seeing is 76% increase in account fraud pressure and a 90% increase in aged account fraud pressure average order value. So the attacks have almost doubled in size, and the attacks have increased by 75%.
One thing that I'll note is you see the
76%, should I say?
Yeah, you'll see the up and down nature here, right, of these attacks, and in terms of really increased pressure in some months, and then kind of moderate or even lower decreased pressure than the kind of baseline. And this is something that is going to have to, on a network as big as ours, or as big as retail, you have to think about kind of how do you keep focus on that.
You just cut out there, Bennett, a little bit, and just to maybe if you want to just repeat that point, maybe.
Yeah, hopefully I'm caught up again. Yes, I was worried it was you, but it sounds like it's me. I think the up and down nature here is really hard for folks, right? So that's why you might need to think about that.
Yeah. Other things to expect in 2023 is policy abuse. So this is quite a stark graph. So each of these are from a survey that we completed, and each of the bars are different excuses used to get an illegitimate return processed. So I was very surprised by the numbers, that over a fifth of all respondents have falsely claimed that an order never arrived, or requested a refund with the intention of keeping the product and getting a refund for it. Just these kind of abuses of policy are here to stay, and will probably continue through the year. And then the next one, what we saw especially in the last half of this year, was Porch piracy. So Porch delivery chargebacks were up in the last half of the year. And this is where a package has been delivered to an insecure or compromised location. And so what we're seeing at Signifyd is that of all these chargebacks that have these characteristics, when we can test them, over 47% of them are found to be false. So there's both an increase in actual porch piracy and an increase in people feigning porch piracy. So something to look out for in the year to come.
Yeah, I just want to talk, if we go back just one film, I want to tie a little bit of these together. This is the thing that I think is very interesting for folks is they'll sometimes come talk to us and say, oh, I have a fraud problem, or I'm really focused on this particular fraud ring that's been bothering me for 3 months. I can't figure this out. I want to do this very specific countermeasure. And maybe the example is like, I want to change my fulfillment providers, or I want to require like, signature on delivery, or something like that. Very tailored, kind of focused, thoughtful approach. The thing is, people who are trying to steal from you don't really care how they get the good, right? And so they'll follow the easiest, path, right, to be able to be able to get the thing. No one wakes up and is like, you know what, I'm going to do a Visa 10.4 today. I'm going to take some stolen, credit card financials, and I'm going to make sure I get those AirPods. No, people wake up and they say, I need to make some money. Here's how I'm going to sell this thing, right? I'm going to steal and sell this thing. And maybe some consumers are convincing themselves, you know what, I didn't really like the customer service for that, or I had to wait an extra week, or, screw that big company, they have enough money. I'm just, it's fine. I'm just exercising my right as a consumer. And so sorting all of those intentions out is very difficult. And there's so many transactions, and there's so many customer service engagements, and then there's so many reverse logistics questions. All of this is to say, I think, and I'll talk about this a little bit later on, but although we're talking about each of these as an MO, a modus operandi, how are they stealing the thing? I think it's important to know that fraud rings and consumers will migrate, right, from that perspective. I think the point Fila made about, hey, actual piracy is up. People are actually doing the thing. They are stealing things from the porch. Well, that's a negative reinforcing cycle, right? Because if it's actually happening, then it becomes easier to lie about it happening, right? Because you kind of then, get blended in with the true problem, right? And so that's another kind of key concept that I think fraud rings and abusive consumers are getting better at is, hey, let me follow the trend so I can blend in with the herd, right, as much as I can. And the better fraud rings and the better, more abusive consumers know where they can do that successfully. And so there's a question: offer product to protect against fraudsters that claim box was stolen and abuse returns. Yes, we have a product for that. It's called Complete Chargeback Protection. It protects against item not received, and we guarantee those in the same way that we would guarantee against fraud. I can talk about that in a bit. And we're actually in the middle of experimenting with guaranteed returns. We already have a returns product, and now we're blending that into returns. So yes, on both of those. I think that's probably the biggest attack vector that has not been solved yet in the market. So sorry, Phil, I just wanted to kind of underscore a couple of your points there.
No problem. And then the last thing that we're going to talk about is card testing and how we think that's going to happen in 2023. So as you can see from the graph, chargebacks where stolen financials were the root cause of the chargeback have increased or in the last half of 2022. And what we're seeing, again, we're seeing those like peaks and troughs as we did in the account takeover, with November being 176% up and December only 17, but still up. And so what we're seeing here is fraudsters stepping up, getting stolen financials from black market or wherever they seem to get these, and just churning through cards to try and get a successful transaction. And that's coming up in the chargebacks that we see. Something that definitely will continue. And with breaches, like my data got breached by MailChimp this week or last week, and there was a SafePass breach. Like, these things happen all the time, and details get out there. So card testing is definitely going to be a factor in 2023.
Yeah, and I think that this is the first step. If you think about the kind of the assembly line of how this fraud ring applied so much pressure during the holidays, the first step is ensuring that the information that they have on a financial instrument is still valid and usable. And so we're seeing folks like in that didn't used to have fraud problems in grocery or kind of like timely delivery of goods and services, all those types of things that didn't used to have fraud as a vector or abuse as a vector. It's starting to shift up there, and we're starting to see kind of the trail of sophistication start with anywhere that you can take a payment. All right, let's use that for a test. Okay, all right, moderately valuable goods, let's kind of use things that are for cardholders that don't have that much of a credit limit. Okay, something super useful like that in the aftermarket, like high-end consumer electronics, maybe we'll even splurge on using accounts, right? That Philo mentioned, where I know kind of the email and I've kind of taken over the account, but I'm going to sit on it and I'm going to make sure I get, 10K worth, not 2K worth in terms of goods during the holidays. The patience that I think people are, these fraud rings are willing to execute on is very different than it used to be maybe 5 years ago, right? In terms of how they'll kind of build up the credibility or wait until they have enough credibility to go for an even more profitable strike. Someone else also asked, later, like, hey, like, how does this year compare to last? I think this is a really good one. It's like 250% in October is kind of one of the peaks, right? 200 to 250%. That's kind of the scale of how much higher the fraud pressure was over this holiday period than prior. All right. Maybe actually, if we step forward, I think I'm next, right, Phelan?
Yep.
Yeah,
so.
Awesome. So, and I think there's a question that will be a good part of this too. So I think that I love the kind of fundamentals, right? I'm sure it's maddening, but like the fundamentals of e-commerce are still so important, right? Of, hey, I need to sell more. Okay, make sure that your funnel is clean. Make sure that you're selling everywhere that your people want to, that your consumers want to be buying from, right? All right, let me make sure that everything is efficient and as clean as possible. Let me be as automated as possible. And then ultimately, the whole purpose is customer experience. We just had our revenue kickoff where my keynote was, hey, look, Signifyd does all of these things for our clients, and there's incredible value on the top line and the bottom line, and we fully automate everything. But at the end of the day, the winners are customer experience. And if in retail, you can maximize that customer experience and create those beautiful shopping, it's still like, that is the fundamental thing, right? So any partner in terms of protecting your business from these things that we've been talking about has got to start from the core of the best customer experience possible. Because even with this incredible inflation or, in terms of fraud pressure, fraud attempts are still very low compared to all of the consumers. That's how they blend in. That's why they're successful. If there were too much fraud, the whole system would start to shut down and everyone would freak out. So they're starting to blend in really well, which means 99.5% of the time, it's a good consumer. You cannot be designing even a system of protection. You can't be designing for only the 0.5%. You have to be designing for how you all make money. So I think that is something that is really, really important to focus on. And so the first thing that you have to do that is very different is cart testing, account takeovers. All of these brute force or large scale drip attacks are just very fundamentally different than kind of fraud pressure has been in the past, where if you have a mistake today for a month, it can be disastrous. and your authorization rates can tank, your chargeback rate can spike. I just see if you're not nimble, I can see that the ability of these very sophisticated bots and very sophisticated fraud rings to apply pressure until you break, it's very different than it used to be in the past. So that's the first kind of key concept that I think people need to be aware of. The next one is, look, if you want to be successful, the payments flow has to be excellently clean. You need to have all of your CAC under control. You need to know which channels are working and which are not. And that means you need to tie that to which ones are causing abuse. I think that's something that's super, like, the worst feeling in the world is when you pay to have people know to come to your site to steal from you. Oh my gosh, right? So, and what we're seeing is there's massive differences in the cleanliness of channels. So I think that this is really important for folks to think about. Don't just protect your payments flow, don't protect your customer experience. Really talk with your marketing folks about where's my cleanest, best traffic coming from. Last one is, in order to be able to do any of the things that we're talking about, you have to think about automation, right? And at the speed, at the scale of e-commerce that we're getting to, you can't be having human being experts intervene at even 5% of decisions, even 1% of decisions. Systems are starting to break. And so what we're seeing is the folks that want to offer the best customer experiences, that want to offer the in-app, total clean, walled garden, beautiful experiences that Amazon and Walmart and others have figured out, it's full automation, right? And that's what consumers are expecting. So with that, be very curious of, within this group, kind of what tools are you all currently using? So rules-based are things like, hey, if, I've seen this IP address more than 5 times, put that into a queue for a human being to take a look at. Or, hey, if I have a chargeback from this shipping address, we don't want to do business with those people ever again, period. So those are things like rules. Machine learning or AI is something like a Signifyd, that's got some data science behind it, and big data helping make those decisions. Human intervention, of course, would be like a queue, right? Of, hey, have experts, fraud experts that are taking a look at any suspicious orders. Typically, the rules based and human intervention kind of go together, but not always. And then, of course, a combination of the above, and also always, of course, potential that many of the folks on this call might not know what their organizations are using. All right. So in the meantime, some folks have asked a question about disputing chargebacks and, hey, they've got damaged goods or significantly not as described. They never contacted us, never did a customer service engagement. What can we do to win more chargebacks? Well, another guy on my team, Doug Agurkis, I took him away from Amazon and Microsoft. He heads up our chargeback group, and we did a Crimes and Cocktails just on this. So if you go to our site, you can see that. Hopefully, it will be helpful. If you want some more information, he's happy to talk with you. But lots of stuff you can do there. And then another fantastic question that is super interesting is, hey, returns fraud. We're seeing customers taking a label, and then once the label is created, they're using that as proof that they shipped the thing back. Well, what they've actually done is they've shipped back an empty box, or I love this one. This one's great. They Photoshop the label, right, so that it looks delivered. Look at that level of sophistication. That's a good one. I want to talk to whoever this is, and I would love to hear more about this story and what we can do. Yes is the answer. We have internally, we have an abuse score based on this. So within our network, we have 460 million wallets worldwide. So Amazon, for example, has about 300 million. So we've probably seen a consumer before use a payment instrument, if they're an actual consumer. People who do this kind of stuff don't do it just to you, right? And so that's how the physical retail world figured this out. It's, hey, let's track this, let's monitor returns, let's kind of share data, and that's the simplest level what we do. There's more to it, and I'd love to talk with you about that returns problem statement. That's super interesting. The other thing that you're probably doing is allowing people to have cash immediately, and that can be difficult, right? From that perspective, to make sure that happens. So, all right, I'm getting the hurry up. I think there was a nice even split of like what people are using in terms of their pieces. I just wanted to talk here a little bit about. I just got off the phone earlier this morning with someone who had not protected the card ad point, and they had a card testing attack vector really hammer them, and Visa shut them down. And I'm like, gosh, like if you only think about the disputes, or you only think about the checkouts, or you only think about account creation, because that's the current pain, I can't emphasize enough that the fraudsters don't care. They're going to go find another way to be able to do this. So you really need to think about, hey, I need a holistic partner internally and externally. I need to be with my chief digital officer. They need to know, they need to understand this. My marketing team needs to understand this. The membership team needs to understand this. The pricing team needs to understand this. The CS team needs to understand this. The ops teams needs to understand this. The finance team, gosh, this is such a hard thing to get everybody oriented around. But I think it's really important, if you're going to protect something, you don't lock the front door, but leave the back door unlocked or a window unlocked. And that's kind of an analogy. You have to think about it holistically. What are the ways that people can do that? So make sure you have a partner who is thinking about it comprehensively and has data to help you at all these points. If you are interested in what we've in what we have kind of talked about, we have an event coming up here in spring. If you use code cocktails, you can get 50% off the tickets for Flow. And it was, April 19th, it's coming up. New York, springtime, it's hard to beat. Last year, we had hundreds of people come. It was a wonderful collaboration, super, great meeting of the minds. And just really, really fun times. Some excellent keynote speakers coming, some really heavy hitters in the e-commerce space, and kind of thought leaders on a lot of these things. We'd love to have you join. And if we take a little bit more nerdy approach, we have the only machine learning for fraud prevention course available with MRC. I will be at MRC. If you're there, come say hello. I'd love to. I'll be speaking on stage with some of our clients. Would love to chat and learn from you. I mentioned I have the webinar coming out on the 2nd. Hacking humans. It's a fun one. And then everyone can have the state of fraud report for 2023, which kind of outlines a little bit of these, goes into great detail about that the Southeast Asian fraud ring, and kind of just as much information as you could ever possibly want about that attack. Some fun, hopefully fun stories within that one. All right. I mentioned that there would be a gift, and we are just about on time. So thank you so much for attending. Really hope that you found this helpful. Going with the cocktails theme, we can get you a mocktail kit, old fashioned, from some of our clients. We love this space. We love kind of trying together all the fun things that you can do in retail. So sorry for those of you who we can't ship to for legal reasons, but hopefully the fun idea kind of, carries through from that perspective. So I don't think we have any. Actually, there's one last question that I'll maybe end on. Again, plugging the prior crimes and cocktails. I like the idea of talking about what's happening in buy now, pay later in terms of fraud and abuse. But last question, any thoughts on normalish split between true and friendly fraud? Yes, your recovery rate should be about 40% in a nice, healthy, balanced ecosystem. That means that friendly fraud should probably be about 60%. If your win rates are pretty healthy from that perspective. I'd love to chat with you if you have more questions. Really appreciate your time today. Phelim, any last thoughts?
And not for me. Thanks for attentive listening. Thanks for all the engagement and questions. But yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. One last piece. Were gift cards part of the fraud ring? Yes. Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. All right. Really appreciate everybody's time. Hope everyone has an excellent into their January.